I was fortunate to have access to computers at a pretty young age. My mom owned a desktop publishing company that she worked out of her basement, so she had some pretty powerful Macintosh computers back in the day, some 030s, no 40s, and that was an interesting era because there weren't a ton of games on Mac, but there was a pretty cool community being built on around them on the internet for games like Bolo and Marathon, and so I think I first got into games and also working to make content for games with those games. So I remember having a Wolf 3D map editor and then making Marathon levels. And my friends and I would have LAN parties because we had 5 guys that all were cursed to have Macs. And that's what it felt like at the time. But we could bring our Macs over to one place and play Marathon. And so we'd make maps during the week and then go and play them at our friends' houses on the weekends. And that was super fun. So that's what kind of got me my first taste of putting content into a game and sharing it with other people and then kind of getting their feedback on it. And that's kind of, I think, that plus early, I think it might even go back even further. Back in first grade, I remember we had Fun Fridays where if you were good throughout the whole week, you got to you had a 2-hour block in which you could do whatever you wanted to. You could go outside, you could play with blocks, you could do whatever. And so my friends and I would take these big long sheets of paper and just draw Super Mario Brothers levels. And they would have 5,000 bullet bills, and they're all impossible things, but we could play them in our minds, and that was before we realized that that is actually very similar to how you make a level. We didn't have a tile map utility there, but we were just drawing what we thought would be that, and then kind of handing them to each other, and then drawing little lines about how you would go through this level. Was probably my first kind of game design activity, and that was super cool. So nerdy friends getting together, doing game stuff, for sure.
Did your parents encourage that sort of behavior, or just that impulse you had to sort of be creative in that way?
They did and they didn't, because I think it was hard to tell what was a creative way to use computing and what was just being addicted to video games. So they did send me to a couple art camps. I got to, I learned Photoshop really early, Photoshop 3 on my mom's computer, and so I was able to start doing some graphic design. I was really into graphic design for a while, and that's kind of what I liked. I like making web pages from an early age. I remember making those awful GeoCities pages with blinking tags and awful animated GIFs and all this stuff. So they encouraged that, but I think at the same time they realized that I was pretty addicted to games, and I would spend all of my free time. I was one of those kids where I would get kicked out of the house because I needed to go outside, and that was when I grabbed my Game Boy and then take that with me. So I think it was tough to balance those things, and also just being a new thing. Even though my parents were pretty hip with technology at the time, they also didn't really know how it was going to play out in our lives. And I imagine parents of today are feeling similar stuff with the internet and social networking, where it's hard to tell. If your kid building something in Minecraft, if that is a formative experience that's going to shape them into the engineer they'll be in the future, or they're just yelling at each other on a Minecraft server and killing pigs. So I think it was something similar to that. They liked hearing about the creative stuff I did, but then they also were horrified to watch me play Doom, and I had to uninstall Doom, so that was a bummer. So I attended Georgia Tech, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I started as a computer engineer, and then I switched to being computer science, and then I even switched to business management for a year, which we called riding the M train. And I was just not super happy with what I was doing and what the outlook on future opportunities were. And then a new program was created called computational media. And I love this program because it's about half computer science and half digital media studies. So for me, the driving motivation is seeing cool pixels on the screen, making something new, a new experience that no one has seen before, doing something creative where you start out with an idea that you jot down in some words or a drawing, and then seeing that come to life on the computer. And the traditional computer science courses didn't really help that. It was more about kind of timed challenges of recreating things that people have already done. Can you understand this algorithm? Can you implement this? And that wasn't motivating to me at all. I felt crushed by that curriculum. And so going into this new thing where it's yes, you still need to learn C++, but the way we're going to learn it is by making Game Boy Advance games. That was awesome. So that was all the motivation I needed. It was, you've got 2 weeks to make a project, you're going to present it in front of the class, and I wanted to make the best things. So it really got me stoked about creating things. EA came to campus and was hiring for interns, and I got an internship at EA Tiburon in Orlando. Not as a designer, actually. I was writing Perl scripts for some database backend stuff for telemetry, like calculating how many people around the world were playing FIFA during the World Cup, that kind of thing. But then I was like, that was cool. Next summer, I want to be a designer. And then they shipped me off to EA LA for another internship, where I got to work with some amazing people on the Steven Spielberg project there. And that was kind of that's when it cemented as like, this is what I want to do. I want to design and code, but more on the creative side of things, and work with these brilliant people, working with artists and engineers and business people alike to kind of bring these things together. I think it was a good learning experience. It was an amazing internship because I got to meet and work with some really, really talented people like Doug Church and Randy Smith, and Jake Kasdal, who is making Galaxy right now, like all these guys. Borbert Pfeiffer, they were just amazing. Like, there's so many amazing people I met through that internship who then went on to do great things. It also showed me that just having talent in a room does not necessarily create a project. That it kind of set the stage for game development doesn't always go the way you planned for it to. And there are people who invested years of their life into that project, and all that's left of it is a couple investigative journalist stories on the internet trying to figure out what the heck it was. And that was kind of mirrored. The first project I worked at EA Redwood Shores also was a project that never came out. So it's interesting now that we're doing this fan-facing development where you can see what happens. And now we're seeing this stuff kind of come out of Kickstarter and early access, where not all projects turn out the way you think they will. Passion for a project doesn't always last throughout the whole time. Resources don't always last. Key people can leave or have personal issues that happen in their lives that will change the way that they can help work on a project. So it's interesting to see that, and I think that I learned that early on, and also it really encouraged me to be looking towards shipping stuff. Like, you just working on a game and getting paid for it is not as rewarding as working on something that is going to be getting into people's hands and is going to make people have a good time and kind of peek into your brain and interact with what you've created. So it definitely has driven my decision making since then in terms of what I want to work on, and it's been super great at Double Fine because we, like Amnesia Fortnite, it's amazing to go from idea to people playing it so quickly, and that kind of thing is very rewarding and motivating and just like, I don't know, great for pumping people up. You hear about these projects people work on for years that then get canceled for one reason or another, and there's, very rarely are there no good reasons for that. Those decisions are not made lightly, but they need to be made, and that's not rewarding, and that's very soul-crushing as a developer. So it was good to see that as an intern, because I wasn't going to be on that project long-term anyways. I got to kind of see what happens there, and then that kind of helps mentally prep me for being in the industry where, yeah, like you might work on something for a couple of years and then no one gets to hear about it and you can't talk about it. But luckily, that's not the case at Double Fine. You get to hear and talk about just about everything we're working on, and that's cool. Yeah, my first full-time gig was at EA Redwood Shores, and then I got a call from a friend at Naughty Dog, and they were looking for designers to help work on Uncharted 3. I was a big fan of that series, and so I jumped at that opportunity, and that was awesome. So I moved down to Santa Monica. My friend actually went to Georgia Tech, and he recommended me, so that was awesome. He's now one of the lead designers on Uncharted 4, so that's cool. Great to see him take off and really kick some butt. But it was a very different approach to game development than I had experienced at EA. It was a much flatter organization, fewer like kind of levels of producers that are kind of looking over the way that things are being scheduled and planned, and they really had built a tool set for designers to let designers quickly prototype and iterate on things, on content. and everyone was kind of, everyone was encouraged to be implementing and getting things in the game, and the game was the design document in a lot of ways. Building the skeleton of the game early on, getting things playable as soon as possible, and not, hoping that things will be there in the future. If it's not in the game right now, it might not be in the game. So if you really want this to be in the game, you better work on it, get it in, get it approved, and get people excited about it. So that was a really cool experience. It was very, I don't know, it was stressful at first, and then it was very freeing once I kind of let go and said, okay, I'm just going to embrace this methodology and just know that we have so many passionate people pouring over this thing that we will get it to where it needs to go. And that was really cool. So it was probably the most I've ever worked in my life, the hardest I've ever worked, but also very rewarding. And so when I got hired at Naughty Dog, I did work on the Melee system there, so I was a combat designer, but I also got to do more general scripting, and that was super fun. So setting up an environment to have events happen and then come up with tricks to kind of warp things into place when they need to be and to direct the player's gaze and to kind of understand how a player was going to move through an environment and then trigger the right things to happen at the right time. That was super interesting and fun, and I loved doing that. And but one of the reasons I was excited about coming to Double Fine was to hopefully be more of a generalist. I'm really interested in mechanics design and really understanding how mechanics can play with each other and produce gameplay, and to kind of break out of that just fight things role. I mean, I'm very comfortable in that role, but I wanted to break out of that. And so even though I actually came on to help Brad with Brazen, I was doing combat design there. So we were creating combat moves for the characters for Brazen. But it was actually amazing to work on Amnesia Fortnite 2012 because it was like, oh, here's something completely different. And I was out of my element, and it's still a little scary whenever I'm doing something that isn't just create combo moves. But I think it's really helped me grow as a designer. And Massive Chalice was another awesome opportunity to do that. It was, the timing of attacks is only an aesthetic thing in Massive Chalice. It's really about the mechanics underlying it. What are the numbers doing? How are things moving in this grid? And what is the player aware of? And what are their tools that they can use? So I was excited to kind of take what I'd learned in real-time combat and apply that to turn-based combat. Well, part of it is any new project I join into, I try to do a deep dive into that genre or inspirations. And so for me, it was going back to some of the turn-based games I liked, like Final Fantasy Tactics. We had all kind of really gotten into the new XCOM the previous year, and so going back and playing that again and again, I beat it on my iPhone 4, and I thought that was impressive, playing through the whole game on a little iPhone 4. And then also I'd been getting into more turn-based board games and some miniatures play, and so just kind of pumping that up, what did I like about D&D, 3.5 combat versus D&D 4 combat? How do different grid systems work? I hadn't really done a lot of stuff with hex grids, so I did a deep dive into that too, just to see okay, what does it really mean to say we want a square grid versus a hex grid, and what are those limitations, and what are the affordances of those two different styles? So some of what I did was research. I presented that to the team. I did a big thing about square grids versus hex grids, because I think we all came in with some a priori knowledge, things that we thought were the truth, or certain biases towards certain systems because of games that have expressed different mechanics through those. But it was good to have a better way to kind of list some pros and cons and understand how they'll impact the future game decisions. So, and I remember that being a hot thing on the forum at the time too. The two biggest things were what kind of grid system to use and what kind of turn order system to use. And I was super confident that we could come up with an awesome game, regardless of what decision we make. But if we had gone with a hex grid at the beginning, I think we would have ended up with a very different game feel right now. And so those early pillars and really sticking with them really changed things a bunch. So the grid system is about the way that you present space and the way the player uses space. And so we were still, one of the big questions is, are we doing more indoor fighting, outdoor fighting? How is the player supposed to understand and grok that space? How are they supposed to understand movement? Hex grids are great in the way that from the center of one hex to any other that touch it, there's no distance change. So you can't game the system by moving diagonally and moving faster than you would otherwise. But no matter how you line the grid, there's going to be one axis where you can't move straight. And so there's some weird stuff with that. And facing is more interesting in a hex grid, but if the game mechanics don't call for facing to be a big deal, then that kind of takes some of that away. Also, just at ease of mathematical representation and understanding trickling down the line. So even though Chad was like, yeah, I could do both. I mean, he's a brilliant dude. Everybody needs to understand how to make art for those things, and also how to tune for those things, and what's the expression of those. So look, and that was something we checked out a bunch of different implementations of both, and it was just kind of like, let's go with the thing that in our gut we feel is going to work, and we've seen many examples of it working. So we did have to come up with rules for the way diagonal movement works. For attacking, we didn't want to be just cardinal directions attacks like Final Fantasy Tactics. I think it makes it feel more board gamey when you're like, well, this character's right next to this guy, but he can't hit him. But that also, the scale of the characters and the way the animations work, we had to prove out that we could have one animation that works regardless of what direction you attack, and we don't have to create new animations for that, because it just means that every attack that you do in the game is going to be more costly. So a lot of things trickle out of those decisions, and there's an alternate universe right now where there's some hex-based individual turn timer version of Massive Chalice, where we're all lizard people or something. I don't know, and I'd love to play that game too. But at the end of the day, this is still Brad's project, and he provided a vision and led us in certain directions, and we tried certain things first, and if they didn't work, we tried something else. And I think from the get-go, one of the things I like about this project is that keeping something public doesn't mean that you have to make all of your decisions based on what the loudest forum member is yelling at that time. And I think that our fans and the backers trust us to take that into consideration, but also to go in the direction that we think will work. And we get to play all the iterations. That's the other thing with games, is a lot of times you'll read a review and they'll say oh, I wish they did blah. And the thing is, they probably tried that. Most of the time you probably try that, or you consider it, and there are reasons not to do it, and maybe, and there's also some push and pull, and you might say well, we tried that, but it made this other thing worse, and this other thing was more important to the game, and trust us, if you played the other version, you would agree that this version's better. It's hard to tell where that line goes, so it'll be interesting. I haven't gone back to some of the early team streams, but I bet you could trace some threads of things that have changed throughout in similar ways. One of the big things that I think was hard to nail with Massive Chalice is encounter distance. When do you encounter new enemies, and how do you see them? How do you feel like you're not just stumbling upon them? We didn't want to go with the pod approach of XCOM, and I understand why they did that, and it makes sense. And you read some reviews where they're like, oh, I didn't like popping pods, or it made it feel too mechanical as you're creeping forward, but it also provides great encounters because they get it behind cover and they get the ability to set up, and it's still but we didn't want to go that route. We want to have creatures in the environment moving around, but didn't want it to feel like they were just randomly showing up, or that you were always one turn behind. And so a couple of key changes we did is we increased the player sight distance, so you actually have a couple tiles where you can see them and they can't see you, and then really had to tighten up the distances between encounters. That you'll spawn into some levels and there'll be enemies on the screen ready to go, and you get the first chance to react with that, but that feels good. Having multiple turns of running around without finding somebody looking for some fog of war isn't very fun. And so really try to constrain the levels more. I think our first levels were probably 3 times the size of the ones right now, and that was something that we did a lot of. We did a lot of push and pull on. So we made these big levels. We're like, this is boring. Takes too long to get through. But we still wanted that exploration and that uncovering of the map to be a thing. And so the final solution of taking some of the levels and building in interactive elements that can block off certain parts so that we can actually take one map and then reuse it for more configurations, I think was genius, and really does help the gameplay. Like I was playing at home last night actually, and like all of my battles were, took within about 5 minutes of each other. It was from like 15 to 20 minutes of battle, and I think it felt perfect. Like it was enough to feel like I had a meaty fight, but not too long. And there was one battle where I was like, oh man, if there's one more guy, I might, take a break because I'm like, I'm about, and it was that right as I said that, I killed the last guy, and then that battle was done. So I really think that like playing with those mechanics and figuring out how long it's going to take to play through and what feels like a weighty battle that isn't too long, it's just a function of time and figuring it out. And so having the tools to be able to build the maps and rebuild the maps and test and putting in those blockers as procedural blockers, like all that stuff really helped us get to where the game is today. We had to plant some flags in the sand pretty early to just kind of limit the scope of things. So one of them is that like there's no height difference in the game, and while we could have made a fully voxelized world with height difference playing into the mechanics and stuff, we were like, yeah, this is going to be something that you could see taking the game from being a $1 million game to being a $2-3 million game, because so many things have to fall out of that in terms of the way that characters move through the world. Do they need to now have jump and fall animations? If I have a guy who's up a hill from somebody else, can he attack someone down the hill? Do we need to like work on the animation system for that? Do the maps need to now have like the gridded map tool that we used would not work in a 3D environment as easily. So a lot of stuff came out of that decision, and while in the ideal world, the $20 million Massive Chalice would have all kinds of stuff like B mounts and Oculus Rift support. You just got to be realistic with it. So the good thing about that is that like it does create constraints that you work within. It helps to be able to say, okay, well, some things are just out of the question, and I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to think about that. Like that helps you focus on what you can do and what will be there, and then how can you play with those elements. I do think that like that is the cool thing about it is that I think we understand more about how these games work now than we did at the start. Like, this was also the first strategy game most people on the team had worked on, and it was the first turn-based strategy I think anybody on the team had worked on. Like Chad had done some RTS stuff in the past, but so I think it was a lot of learning process, and we knew there was going to be a lot of learning to go through it. And at Double Fine, every one of our games, for the most part, is a different genre. So we've done lots of that. Like we've done lots of prototyping in all kinds of genres. So we knew we could do it, but we also knew that was going to be a challenge. And building that in that learning time into the schedule was tricky. We always like, how many character classes should you have? And, more is the answer. But you also have to figure out like what is the core of the game that will make it happen, and how can we really focus on the characters that we want to get in. So we had to decide, do we want to do, like 4 major character classes and no hybrids, or 3 character classes and hybrids that will make it feel more like 9 or 6 or whatever it is. And so that was a big question we had. And I think at one point we were pushing one direction, and then we started pushing another direction, and there are a lot of reasons and a lot of things that go into that decision. But yeah, I think that one of the good things about being crowdfunded is that you are making the game. Like, you have an obligation to finish it and ship it, so it doesn't become one of those projects where you work on it for 2 or 3 years and it gets bloated and then never comes out. Like, that is something that you can't do. Like, it is the death knell for the crowdfunded developer. And so while we had less to work with, we also knew that it was kind of a straight shot to getting this into people's hands, and that's super exciting. It's amazing to see it, in 1 year, turn into a reality. So it almost feels like an Amnesia year. Like you go from concept to reality super quick. And it's been a cool rush. Yeah, I mean the biggest advice is prototype early and often. Get things playable in any way, shape, or form you can to express a concept and see if it's going to work. You know, for some of the combat games, we did a lot of kind of video prototyping of just like let's see what this might look like, and then go to the gym and, you know, have somebody act out some moves in slow motion and just see how that might feel from a game camera. Get up on a ladder and look down. I did a little bit of kind of paper and board game prototyping in Mass Chalice, where we got, you know, the game online to see how some of the turn stuff might feel and some of the abilities, and then just as soon as you can get a character up and running and get some mechanics going, that's the best thing, is to get things in the game as early as possible. Your preconceived notions are not always going to be right. You're going to have some gut feelings that might turn out to be right, but a lot of them aren't, and you need to test it as soon as possible. So I think that people are in a great place right now because we have tools like Unity and Unreal for that can help non-coders get things up and running as fast as possible or earlier. You can take an existing game. Another thing is you can prototype through other games. So we did, like, you know, pick apart Tactics and XCOM and looked at, like, okay, like, you can actually, you know, play these games in ways that they're not meant to be played, to kind of see what the underlying system is, or to, like, let's imagine that I can only move as far, you know, half as far as I normally can. What would the game feel like? You know, like, let's start a multiplayer match where we're both aliens and we have all of the melee guys, and what does that feel like? You know, like, there's ways to kind of play with ideas before, you know, you need to code them up, and the earlier you can do that, the better. The other thing is, like, being able to script and code is super huge for designers. Very few people are able to be just paper designers only these days, and they shouldn't be. I think that's, like, not the way to go. I think being able to implement your own stuff, being able to play with ideas. What I like to do is work really closely with an engineer that kind of sets me up to branch off on some ideas. Like, he might code the core ability, and then I can now mutate that in, like, 5 different directions, really play with some of those things. So, like, well, what if, you know, part B happens before part A? Like, I already have part A and part B coded in a solid way that isn't going to crash the game. And so I can kind of mix things up and play around with it. And so that's something that helps me work really quickly. I could probably, you know, code that stuff myself. It just might take a little longer than someone who's a really, you know, badass gameplay coder. But being able to take the tools and create gameplay as early as possible is awesome. And then also just knowing, having enough experience with tools and making games that you have an idea of what will enable you to do that. And so if there's an easy system that can be set up, like the map system we did as an example, that can then enable you to play with more gameplay, then that should be focused on first. So don't worry about how it looks. You know, with Mass Chalice, like, we could have even just kept it in kind of block land or, like, super blocked out animations, you know, longer than we did even. But you know, the last few months have been a lot of art polish. You know, VFX and stuff. Like, those things are great. They're part of the aesthetics that help players understand the mechanics. But if you are the designer, you know the mechanics going in, and you can totally play it without that stuff. And being able to put in, you know, designer effects and sound, like, he has a little clink, and then there's just, like, a poof of blue smoke to represent a hit effect. You know that, you know, Panya or someone's going to come back and make that beautiful later. But just to get it in there and to feel that impact, like, the more you can do on your own without having to go through 2 meetings and 3 days of bouncing back and forth, the better. And then that also can, you know, help you get to the point where you say, okay, this is something we want to do. Let's push it further. Or, like, oh, that was a good experiment. Let's get rid of that and never talk about it again. And that's what I've really learned through back my days at Georgia Tech. We did lots of project-based classes where we had to learn new programming languages and build things out of it super quick. Everybody had to do that. At Naughty Dog, like, all the designers are also scripting, and you know, like that. And then here, like, working with Brad and doing the prototypes for Brazen and AF, like, MTG Fortnite's a great practice for this stuff because, you know, it encourages people to wear multiple hats and to get things in the game as soon as possible. And I think that kind of extrapolates out to the way we build full-size games.